Wargames are having a moment. Newspaper and nightly news warn that wargames map a huge toll in a war over Taiwan, and that in order to win, the Air Force will have to buy new bombers and fighters. Congress members like Congressman Mike Gallagher have even argued that war games should be a standard part of congressional budget and legislative processes. So what are war games? And should we believe what they say? While often called simulations or exercises, war games are distinct from computer simulations of combat, field exercises featuring actual military forces, or organized brainstorming sessions, affectionately called BOGSATs. Instead, war games are interactive events that display 4 characteristics: human players, immersed in scenarios, bounded by rules, and motivated by consequence-based outcomes. War games go back millennia, with evidence of games in ancient Rome, early Iraq, and China. They took on a central role in the modern conduct of war with the Prussian development of Kriegspiel, a board game that simulated combat to train officers. A century later, the United States' embrace of war games for military planning between World Wars I and II became a pivotal part of the Navy's success in the Pacific. During the Cold War, the U.S. military turned again to war games to understand the impact of the nuclear revolution. U.S. defense wargaming continued after the Berlin Wall fell, with games designed to test new ideas about warfare and aid acquisition decisions. But while wargames have primarily looked at military or crisis situations, their use goes far beyond war. Governments use games to simulate natural disasters and to assess economic cooperation. Consultants use wargaming to test new business strategies, and scholars use gaming to study how human behavior affects various social and political phenomena like governance, revolutions, and insurgencies. Games are closely tied to policy decisions. Because they have such a strong experiential quality, they can be compelling evidence for policymakers faced with difficult decisions in rare or unexpected scenarios. Senior decision makers often rely on lessons learned from games in which they previously participated, and the evocative results from games, especially ones played with high realism, can be far more persuasive than lab-produced models or simulations. Indeed, games can be such powerful devices of influence that organizations have been known to change rules, to influence outcomes, and leak results when it benefits their cause. War games are increasingly prevalent and have a long history of influencing policy. But what makes a good game? And how should we evaluate wargaming data when making policy? In general, for games that are analytic or designed to answer questions, a good game should have 5 qualities. First, they need to be enjoyable and believable so that players act in the game as they would in real life. This is what we call external validity in social science. Secondly, they need the right players with the correct expertise and demographics to mirror real-world decision makers. In other words, we need the right sample to represent our real-life population. Third, there need to be enough players and game iterations to be able to make conclusions that go beyond the unique characteristics of any one instance. This is called generalizability. Fourth, good war games control for bias within their scenarios and rules. Things like baking in certain outcomes or creating scenarios that unduly influence players' behaviors. When we're able to control for bias that may invalidate results, we call this internal validity. The best games have both external and internal validity. Finally, for analytical games, the best designs have good data collection, able to explain not only what happened in the game, but why. The primary value of using and analyzing war games is not in generating new or better data about outcomes, but is instead in understanding behaviors and choices leading to these outcomes. War games don't predict what will happen in conflict or crisis, but they can tell us why and how one outcome or another occurred. This can be hard to do, and so most games struggle on one of these dimensions, sometimes intentionally. That doesn't mean that war games aren't important for policy, but that we need to do a better job of analyzing across games for patterns of outcomes and behaviors. Here at the Hoover Institution, we are working to make wargaming an even better tool for policymakers, building the first ever open source archive of war games and wargaming data, running games on some of the biggest policy questions of our time about cyber, nuclear weapons, AI, and space, and providing wargaming resources for the classroom to build the next generation of policy analysts.